Right now, I want to give you a live look out in Gaza. Following a report this morning from the Associated Press, they say Hamas said on this Saturday it would only release an American Israeli and the bodies of 4 other hostages if Israel implements the existing ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, calling it an, quote, exceptional deal aimed at getting the truce back on track. A senior Hamas official said long-delayed talks over the ceasefire's second phase would need to begin the day of the release and last no longer than 50 days. Israel would also need to stop barring the entry of humanitarian aid and withdraw from a strategic corridor along Gaza's border with Egypt. Hamas would also demand the release of more Palestinian prisoners in exchange for hostages who spoke on condition of being anonymous to discuss the closed-door talks with the Associated Press. A lot to discuss on this topic, so let's bring into the conversation Executive Director for Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, Dr. Asaf Romirowsky. Dr. Asaf, good morning. Always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So on this Saturday morning, Dr. Asaf, we are seeing that yet again, Hamas is making more demands towards Israel as it relates to the release of American Israeli hostages, but also they're wanting the release of Palestinian prisoners and other agenda items. You're always great with your perspective. Put this into context, please, because people are thinking we are closer to getting rid of Hamas and its terroristic acts. But based on these demands, it doesn't seem like that's likely.
No, and that's really, the critical part of your point here. Hamas's only lifeline are the hostages. We've spoken about this for the past over 500 days now. And so they know exactly what they're doing, not to mention the fact that these are the last of the Israeli-American hostages. So there's 1 alive and 4 dead, especially Eden Alexander, the kid from New Jersey. And so all of this is to put pressure on the Trump administration. Remember, when Trump came into office, he's the one who really moved the process along. It was clear there's a new sheriff in town as far as moving this agenda along. But Hamas is basically trying to flex its muscles to show that really, as much as Trump is trying to move a process along, we still hold the cards, and they know very much so that the United States wants to have American citizens back home, and so that's where the pressure is coming from. The demands are not new demands. It is really interesting to see, of course, that they're very amorphous. They're very unclear about who are the prisoners' names are as far as names, and that's by design. The demand for the security corridor, that refers to the Philadelphia route. That is exactly that security border between Israel and Egypt, which has provided the lifeline and the oxygen for ensuring Hamas's survival. Israel has, of course, halted some of the aid going in as a result of some of this, what's going on now. And of late, they cut off the electric to try to put pressure on Hamas to move this along. It's been now a little bit over 3 weeks since phase 1 ended, and in phase 1, so there's been no release of hostages, is the Israelis want to move this along as a result of the mounting pressure that's coming on Netanyahu and the government as far as releasing. We're guesstimating about 59 hostages left dead and alive. And so these were part of the ultimate goals of the war itself in the beginning. The tension has been, of course, is that the ultimate goal was the annihilation, to your point, of Hamas and the release of the hostages. Let me also be clear here for your viewers to remind everybody, if Hamas comes out of the tunnels and is able to survive the day after tomorrow's scenario, that is considered to be a failure for the Israelis, and that's something they cannot live with.
Dr. Asaf, let's break down some of these demands from Hamas this Saturday morning. Let's start with them demanding more humanitarian aid and saying that Israel would need to withdraw from that strategic corridor. Many of the viewers this morning saying that demand is counteractive because when aid was trying to get to the Palestinian people, they were stealing it. And you speak of the tunnels, literally stealing that aid, going into the tunnels and keeping it for themselves.
100%. I mean, let's be clear here. The fact that there has been more aid coming into Gaza post 10/7 than ever before. Hamas indeed steals and gouges and gives the impression, but nobody is starving in Gaza. There's no starvation. There's no famine. This is now during the month of Ramadan. If you there are images of there's the amount of meat and the amount of celebrations that happen, in every post, during the day of Ramadan, but in the nights there are celebrations. There's enough food coming in. The imagery is very much different. The challenges, of course, with many of the NGOs that you and I have discussed over the past year and a half now, namely groups like UNRWA, which is the UN Workers Relief Agency, basically has been complicit with Hamas. UNRWA has been proven to be involved directly with 10/7. They have been Hamas members all along. So the entire architecture has been fabricated and to create an aggrandized version of this propaganda to show starvation and famine and whatnot. But this is all manufactured indeed by Hamas. The biggest concern, of course, that the Israelis have security wise is, again, the smuggling of arms and rearming Hamas in order to ensure the fact that they have more arms to fight with. When Hamas started this war back in 10/7, they had 30,000 missiles, and they're still able to make it happen. And so here we are continuing in over 500 days, and the war still continues. Those smuggling and those arms have been all coming in, again, with the support and funding from Iran, and have been coming through those tunnels. That's not something that the Israelis can live with, not to mention the fact that if the end game is to try to rehabilitate Gaza. And the question that's been coming out of the Trump administration as far as how to make that happen, they need to disentangle whatever civilian population exists from Hamas. And that cannot happen within the current landscape if Israel withdraws from the Philadelphia route, which is where all of this is coming from. Not to mention the fact that the Egyptians have refused all along to help out with any kind of humanitarian aid. All they want to do, as far as safe zones, all they want to do is actually make sure that the rehabilitation takes place in Gaza and doesn't put the onus on them. Though let's also remind your viewers that Gazans are indeed Egyptians, and so it would actually show good faith and goodwill if actually they help their actual brethren in moving this process along. The Egyptians have been helpful, trying to be helpful when it comes to the diplomatic track, but not actually opening up the border as it relates to moving along safe zones for humanitarian passage.
Dr. Asaf, looking at more demands this Saturday from Hamas, they're also demanding the release of more Palestinian prisoners in exchange for hostages in their captivity. Provide that context, because many of these Palestinian prisoners were actually paid by Hamas to carry out many of their demands. That's why they're in jail right now. Some of them committing rapes, murders, other horrific things. It's not like they went to the local market and stole a candy bar. Many people on edge in this area saying, if you release these people, they could be repeat offenders.
100%. The calculus here is not an equilibrium. I mean, these are not the fact that the Israeli hostages have been innocent civilians that have been suffering. We have now mounting evidence from the released hostages as far as the amount of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, of what they've gone through, not to mention the people who've come in and also came now to the president's State of the Union. There were a delegation of hostages. He heard firsthand about the actual suffering that has been happening in Gaza. What you are talking about is basically fortifying the Hamas bench. These are active Islamist terrorists who are going to go back and really and reinforce their manpower and their capabilities. Let's not forget, this is exactly how Yahya Sinwar, when he was running and started the war itself, that's how he got released to begin with back in 2011 during the Gilad Shalit deal, and he went back and started this war. So we are talking about here actually ensuring the fact of Hamas's survival by releasing these active terrorists. But again, this also shows on the flip side what Israel is willing to do for the value of life, given the fact that they sanctify life as far as what they're willing to do in order to bring back their hostages home, and also those who are dead back to a grave, and to create some kind of closure as far as the bereavement of what these families have gone through since this war has began back in 2023, and what they're still going through daily as far as the ongoing suffering.
Yeah, you mentioned what families are going through. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the innocent Palestinians in the area that have nothing to do with this conflict, nothing to do with Hamas. How do they move forward, Dr. Asaf? Because many of them looking to their own local governments who have pretty much put their hands in the air and said, we don't want anything to do with this.
Again, all of this has to do with the agenda that Hamas has had. Hamas's agenda is to create this propaganda narrative in order to create the suffering. They have been using and abusing their own population. And again, if there is going to be a question about what the rehabilitation of Gaza is, then Hamas needs to be out of the picture. Hamas cannot be part of the day after tomorrow. Hamas cannot be around the table. And this was part of what irked the Israelis when there were, over the past 2 weeks now, without the Israelis' consultation, there were direct negotiations between the administration and Hamas directly, giving them a sense that they have a role around the table, giving them a sense of hope. Let us be clear here. Hamas is a designated terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department, by the Israelis. We do not make, and the challenge has been that up to date, there's never been direct negotiations with a terrorist group because we know that they're going to try to hijack the conversation, and they're not operating on the same kind of equal playing field or on the same parameters. We are dealing, as you and I have discussed this for months now, with a culture of death that has no caring whatsoever about the value of human life, and they're using and abusing it to their advantage. And that's what they continue to do, not only by abusing the hostages, Jews and Christians, but also their own population. And for this to move along, this is exactly where one would hope that the Arab world would hopefully stand up and say, we want to actually take care, rehabilitate, move along a process where people were able to live a better life, but Hamas needs to be out of the picture. And that's the message that needs to be clear, abundantly clear to everybody around the table.
Well, Dr. Asaf, we thoroughly appreciate you joining us with this breakdown and your expertise and perspective. I hope you have a great rest of your Saturday.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to give the viewers another live look out in Gaza here at 8/11 on the East Coast. You can see the destruction from the conflict with Israel and Hamas on this Saturday morning. Palestinians returning to the area to survey the damage, also looking to see if there are any mementos they can save. You can see apartment buildings and homes that once were erected in this area, and so people returning to see if they can salvage any of those items. We'll continue to keep you informed right here on Live Now from Fox.